We know there are 3 endings in Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic. The first one, where Arnold gives out the data dive, only to realize he had been speaking to the fake dispatcher all this time, ultimately meeting his death. The second ending, where Arnold activates Cradle.exe, destroys the MCM facility, and M2 crashes his van before escaping with the synthetic. Then the third ending, where Arnold completes the Moon.exe minigame, receives the glitched permission, and then uses it to peacefully shut down M2. I think the first ending is out of context for many reasons, so I want to focus on the second and third endings. A lot of people believe that the third ending is the canon ending, but I want to explain why I think the second ending actually makes far more sense as the true canon outcome. One of the most common arguments against the second ending being canon is that the destruction of the MCM facility would prevent William Afton from gaining access to Edwin Murray's technology. Without MCM, people argue that William couldn't create the Funtime animatronics, build sister location, or continue his work beneath the new Fazbear facility. But when you look deeper into the game's story, it's clear the second ending holds its ground against the third, and in many ways fits the overall narrative better. Throughout the story, it's revealed that several former MCM employees were already secretly passing Edwin's work to William behind the scenes. This implies that William likely had access to critical blueprints and concepts, even before the facility was destroyed. In fact, the burning of MCM might explain why William never obtained Edwin's improved Springlock suits. With those prototypes lost in the fire, he was left relying on older, more dangerous designs, which we know led to multiple tragic incidents later in the timeline. Here's how I think it plays out. In the second ending, the MCM facility in Murray Manor burned down. Afterward, William takes control of what's left, salvaging any usable tech. He constructs a new Fredbear's family diner above the ruins, possibly replicating the layout we see inside the prototype pizzeria, which is later reflected in Fazbear's Fright. He also builds a new house nearby, moving his family in. Meanwhile, the underground tunnels are repurposed into the sister location bunker. Now, there's one major misconception I want to clear up. A lot of people think the house where the crying child lived is the same house as David's room in the Murray Manor, but in actuality, that's not where the Afton family lived. As seen in the Five Nights at Freddy's 4-minute game, the Afton's house was next to the newly built Fredbear's family diner, which implies that this is a new house William built later on. The original Murray Manor, the same one where David lived, was repurposed by William, and is also the one we experienced in the main Five Nights at Freddy's 4 gameplay. It was turned into an experimental testing facility for his insane experiments, such as the nightmare animatronics and the hallucination gas. Back to focusing on the second ending, M2's escape with the synthetic also helps explain why the M2 looks so different in Security Breach Ruin. After escaping, M2 could have used the synthetic it stole to modify and upgrade itself, evolving beyond the version we see in Secret of the Mimic. At some point, between the events of Secret of the Mimic and Security Breach Ruin, M2 was likely captured and sealed away again, this time hidden behind a cement wall in the ruins of the old MCM facility. If M2 peacefully deactivated and was somehow taken over by William, why would it look so much like it pieced itself together with scrap parts by the time of Security Breach Ruin, much like what the scrap animatronics did in Pizzeria Simulator? And also, if M2 was at peace, why would it become aggressive again later in the timeline? The whole point of the third ending is that M2 gets fixed and shuts down in peace. There's no clear explanation for why it would reactivate in a hostile state. I've seen some theorists argue that the deactivated M2 was later recovered by William Afton, somehow turned into the crying child, and over time became aggressive again due to various traumatic events in the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline. But honestly, I think that theory is far too much of a stretch. It forces too many narrative leaps and ignores M2's true nature as an independent, self-serving AI. In the end, I'd like to talk about F10-N4. The Moon.exe minigame is a vision scenario test that F10-N4 created to see whether Arnold is the right one to help repair M2. In the third ending, Arnold passes the test and receives the glitched permission, which leads him to fix and deactivated M2. But in order to beat Moon.exe, Arnold would need to complete every collectible in the game, including the white tiger plush, that's only obtainable after finishing and replaying the game a second time. I think from Steelwool's interpretation, it likely meant that Arnold was never meant to get a hold of the white tiger plush, because it doesn't exist in his reality. This makes the third ending feel more like a what if this could happen, rather than a potentially possible outcome. Like many other people, I also don't think the happy ending scenario fits Five Nights at Freddy's narrative style. Previous theory videos from other theorists have hinted that games like Five Nights at Freddy's 3 actually had the bad ending as canon, with later titles taken as concrete evidence. A happy ending for Arnold, F10-N4, and M2 just seems completely out of place. On the other hand, many people who support Ending 3 might argue that F10-N4 would need to survive in order to become the MXEs we saw in Security Breach Ruin, and the second ending could have destroyed her instead. However, from what I see in Ending 2, while the upper structures were caught on fire, it seemed like the underground facilities were partially buried instead of totally destroyed. F10-N4 entered standby mode only after Cradle.exe was activated, which could mean that she had ways to protect herself, such as shutting the doors in the prototype pizzeria office in order to keep herself intact. When Fazbear took over MCN, they could have rediscovered her and modified the machine to be used as MXEs, probably either removing M1 or Fiona from the system, or sealing her deep within it, and used it to keep the recaptured M2, now upgraded thanks to the synthetic, locked behind the cement wall, until the events of Security Breach Ruin. Of course, this is just my take on the story. At this point, anything could happen in this franchise. What do you think? Do you agree with my theory, or do you have a different perspective? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts.